Clink. A one, a two, a one, two, three. Did it? It's Wednesday. I'm in Thursday. So, since I'm now an employee in good standing at Galaxy of Comics, and I work Monday, Thursday, Friday, I'm not gonna make an extra trip. I mean, if I still had a car, it wouldn't be a thing. But yeah, so we're moving this to Thursday for the foreseeable. Also, still have $0 to be spending on funny books. So I only got a couple, but oh, what a few. Okay, so first up this week, Darkhold Alpha. This is Darkhold. The Darkhold is a. You know what? That's actually. I always thought it came around in the '90s, but I think I'm wrong. Beep beep boo 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 boo. Look at the old Wikipedia. So it originally appeared in Marvel Spotlight #4. It's essentially Marvel's kind of Necronomicon, the Book of Sins. Oh, and apparently it's made its way to some of the TV shows, which is kind of cool. But when I was a kid in the '90s, they brought it back and gave it its own title like this, and um, all the Midnight Suns books ran through it as well. So you had Ghost Rider, Spirits of Vengeance, which was Ghost Rider and Johnny Blaze, the original Ghost Rider, and Darkhold itself had its own title, and then I don't remember what else. Anyway, so this is like another kind of throwback for old farts like me, and I'm all on board. Steve Orlando writes it, and he writes a lot of good magic stuff like that. That tends to be his thing. Oh, and this is a Greg Smallwood cover, which I only just now realized, so that's also good. Also this week, this is very exciting. A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance, #1 from Image Comics. This is written by Rick Remender and drawn by Andre Lima Araujo, which I'm not sure I'm saying that right at all. Remender is a given. Like, I'll watch or read anything by that guy. Plus, also, this clearly looks like a noir crime book with apparently starring Wong from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I also have no problem with. Andre Lima Araujo, I discovered, I want to say about 8 or 9 years ago, and boy, oh boy, is he a good artist. He is South American, as far as I know. I knew him because he drew Avengers AI, which was a book, like a spin-off book from the Avengers series, and oh, did he also draw Age of Ultron? I think he did, or did he just draw a tie-in? Oh, good, the internet's not working again. Swell. Regardless, he's a very, very talented artist, and Carlos Pacheco, Brian Hitch drew. Yeah, so I think Araujo drew. He also drew. I want to say he drew a Silver Surfer series like a couple years ago that I also really, really like. He's just got a very. Um, oh, Generation Gone. That was a good one. One of the War of the Realms books. I feel like I've rattled off his stuff on here before, but since when has that ever stopped me? Regardless, I'm very excited for this, but truly the most exciting. So my position at the comic shop is essentially making sure that back issues, and he's got like a whole room full of overstock that's just all beat to hell and out of order. So I've just been trying to get all these boxes in alphabetical order. But whilst doing, and I've run across some pretty cool stuff. Like he's got a few runs of Crisis on Infinite Earths in there, and like I found today, I found an early. There's Spawn #1 signed by Todd McFarlane. Things like that. Things that just kind of, a lot of it's just kind of junk. I mean, some of it, a lot of it's really, I mean, none of it is something I'm going to turn my nose up at. But this is the only stuff that I saw that I was like, oh, well, I have to have this. This is Gru the Wanderer. Numbers 4, 5, and 8. This is the original series by San Diego's own Pacific Comics, which started in 1984. 83, my mistake. Or maybe even 82. Yeah, I think 82, because these later issues. There was only 8 issues, and these were the last 3 that I need. So I only have a handful of issues. There was the long Marvel series Epic on their Epic imprint, which I'm only missing 2 issues, I believe. There was an Image series that I think I'm missing an issue, and then I think other than that, I've got everything. There actually was a series of oversized graphic novels they did. The first one was The Death of Gru, and I do have that. But then there were a bunch, and those actually, now that I'm thinking about it, those might have been a bunch of reprints. It doesn't matter. I'm very stoked. In this early Gru stuff, it's very different from like the Gru meets Tarzan stuff now. Um, and it's really, I mean, Aragon has never lost a trick, but it is fun to when you read his stuff because the guy's got at this point like a 60-year career to see how he evolved in just the last 40 years. I find that sort of thing thrilling picks of the week. Ba da ba da ba da. And now picks of the beep ba boo ba 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 ba. So I think, I mean, the fact that I'm broke all the time these days, and also just kind of the fact that things are terrible in general. I haven't been. Nothing has really been interesting to me at all. Like, I haven't really been doing anything but working these days because I can't really afford to do anything else. But even when I have like reading time, I'm still getting some in, as we'll see. But for the most part, I'm just really losing interest in a lot of the stuff. And one of the things that is kind of losing its allure for me somewhat is the X books. I mean, I'm always going to be a big X Men guy. That was my first love. But I will say that this particular run of the X Men still remains one of the best. And I think it's because they've really been, or at least they seem to be trying to keep it smaller. I mean, there's a ton of titles, but if one starts to stink, they cut it. And in some cases, I agree. In some cases, I don't. Like they canceled X Factor, but then like the Trial of Magneto has kind of taken over that. That's the other thing too, is that when a book starts to go, blah, 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 they'll go, well, why don't we make a bigger story with these characters, and we'll sell it for $4.99 instead of $3.99. So I caught up through last week anyway with the X books. So first was X Corp #5, which I think is the final issue of this series, which isn't. I like this series, but I don't. I would have been fine if they had kept it going, but I'm also fine with them canceling it. The current X Men book is still really good, and since it's the core title anyway, that's great news. They've also brought the High Evolutionary in to this arc, who's a favorite character of mine, so I'm happy to see him. This was the Onslaught Revelation, X Men: the Onslaught Revelation, and was kind of, as near as I could tell, the wrap up of Way of X, which was another um, X book like X Corp that I think only went 4 or 5 issues. Children of the Atom was the same way. They canceled that, which that one really wasn't very good after a minute. I tried last week to read some of Onslaught 2, which was a big event that I had never read before, and not to give anything away, but it's not very good. I only got a few issues in. I'm sure I'll finish it eventually, but Onslaught was one of the biggest villains the Marvel Universe. It was very much their doomsday, and I've been over all this a million times. It's Professor X and Magneto combined somehow, but also not. And I've honestly have never liked when they do that sort of possession, or like, oh, there's a secret man in your head. But having David Haller, aka Legion, in this book only makes sense because that goes into his powers. So I read the first few issues of Onslaught and I was like, ugh. And then I read this and I was like, oh, okay, well, this didn't get as into the character and everything as I thought they were going to, which is probably for the best. This was the one I was looking forward to the most, and it didn't really live up to those expectations. He brought back. This is Hickman writing X Men again, which is I'm all for, and it really does kind of feel like his farewell because now he's looping back to Moira McTaggart, who he started all this with in House of X and Powers of X. And so Moira McTaggart, who up until just a couple of years ago was a human ally of the X Men, and also an ex girlfriend of Charles Xavier. But then we found out in Powers of X that she actually is a mutant, and her mutant power is reincarnation. So every time she dies, she comes back. She's born the same day, time, and everything. But when she gets to the age that she had lived to in her previous life, she remembers everything. And so she was able to help Charles Xavier and Magneto build Krakoa because she knew how mutants were going to be destroyed every lifeline that she was in, every lifetime timeline slash lifetime that she was in. But now, a secret has come to blow. And honestly, you get halfway through it, and I kind of was just like, I don't really care anymore. I mean, this Inferno has nothing to do with the original Inferno, which I was kind of expecting, but was still a little bummed that it didn't have anything to do with that at all. So it really, like, this all feels like if Krakoa does not, yeah, because Destiny and Mystique are out to stop Moira McTaggart, and now she's aware of that. But due to all the political machinations on Krakoa with their council and everything else, and it gets that's another thing. And I don't know if I should keep blaming Game of Thrones for this, but I kind of feel like that's where it's come from. There's been this like now that they're making another Dune actually makes sense to me because they could never make that very boring book work as a movie. And to me, it was always because it's boring because it's very much it's like Sim City or Sim Earth or something. It's like, oh, let's see how all these things. And I like, dude, I don't care. I want stories on a grand scale like that. There's nothing inherently wrong with them, but I tend to be more interested in the stories of the characters more than the governments. And I think Game of Thrones kind of opened that door to sort of mainstream, especially mainstream nerd culture, because obviously it's a big nerdy show. Um, and Ta-Nehisi Coates' run of Black Panther started this way, and I didn't like that either. And so I kind of hope that they keep most of the stuff that Hickman has done, but I think the focus will be less on Krakoa and mutant society and back to protecting a world that hates and fears them. That's what I'm kind of. I feel like I've gone along with Marvel on everything that they've done for the last 20 years easily. I'm ready for them to go back to stuff. And I think like how the Immortal Hulk is such a good book for the last few years, but now they're going back to kind of like a Hulk smash type Hulk book. And I feel like the current X Men series with Duggan writing it is more in that vein of they're a super team. Uh, just to finish this out, Sword is kind of the outlier because Al Ewing is writing this for one thing, and he's much more into the cosmic angle of the Marvel universe, or that's one of the things that he's into. The guy is a Marvel zombie going way back. Sword, since that's the sword, I can't remember what sword stands for now, but it is the sort of first alert, the distant early warning line for Earth. So they have a satellite around the Earth, and they're there to protect the Earth from alien invasion. And this issue, we have Storm is on Araco, which used to be called Mars. I'm sure you've heard of it. which is another like a whole planet, Araco essentially, with the help of Krakoa, colonized Mars, and the Iraqis are mutants, but kind of not. It's a whole thing. That's an aspect of this whole thing that they can ditch. I don't care about Araco or really any. Some of those characters are fun. Tarn the Uncaring, who Storm fights in this, and Cypher's wife is Iraqi, and she's fun. She's also terrifying. But so this is like, and this is so this book is very. If you were into that Claremont Byrne run with the Starjammers and all that stuff, this is in that same vein for sure. The solo Wolverine book continues to be pretty good too, but it's still like they're really keeping Logan very closely tied to Krakoa, and so yeah, he's currently there were some logic diamonds that were given to Krakoa by the Shi'ar, who were part of that Starjammers era, and so they were stolen during the Hellfire Gala. So ever since then, Wolverine's been trying to track those down, and also the actual Muramasa blade, which he thought he had, but what turned out to be a fake. He finally got it back, and it's again him versus this guy Solom, who was, I believe, also from Morocco, and it's another, like, I think I said this last year when the series started again. I was like, let's put Wolverine back in Madripoor. Let's do. I kind of want. It's been a while since they've really gone back to 80s era Wolverine, which I'm jonesing for. It's been a long time. I feel I've been very patient. They killed him in 2014, and then it was years before he even came back. And now he's been back for a few years, and his own titles still. I mean, he's still really good on the X-Men and stuff, but I really want my Wolverine back. Will I still keep buying him? Obviously, but that's hardly here nor there. So then yesterday I also got to read some other crap that I would like to share with you now, if the computer will continue to cooperate with me. First up is Batlash #7. This was really fun. It's been a long time since I've read Batlash. It's been a long time since I've read any DC Western, but their Western stuff is always super good. And if I'm not mistaken, there's a story in here that is a reprint of the first Batlash story, which I was unaware of. Also, speaking of Sergio Aragonés, the artist for Gru the Wanderer, I always forget that he wrote a lot of these. He was big in that guy for really being, for most of his career, he was known for his work for Mad Magazine, which is obviously over with now. And Gru was another very big one, and he's had other books and projects and stuff too. But those are the two. Gru and Mad are the two that anybody who knows who he is probably knows him from there. But he also wrote a lot of westerns, and they're really good. The thing about the DC westerns of the '70s too, they're very, very simple, very much of their time, but it's a formula that I'm super into. That's right, Daredevil #13. There's like some old Silver and Bronze Age. Well, this next one is not so much, but yeah, this was after Wally Wood left, and then I believe Kirby was doing it again. Wally Wood came on to Daredevil around issue 7, and it wasn't long before he was like, I fucking hate Stan Lee, so I'm not working with him anymore. He designed this costume, the Daredevil costume that everyone's familiar with, and then he fucked off. This is Jack Kirby and John Romita doing this. Seems mostly like Romita, frankly, but Kirby was doing a million other things at this time. And this is also because Kazar is in this, and this was like an era of Daredevil that I haven't read a ton of. And Kazar was even more of a Tarzan ripoff, and he talked like that me Kazar you Jane type thing, which he hasn't done since I was a kid. I don't believe he probably hasn't done it since the '60s. So they reveal, Kazar is really Kevin Plunder. But that was kind of neat. I was like, I just been reading Kazar. Who knew? This is a miniseries from the '80s. This is Prince Namor the Submariner, 1 through 4 of a 4-issue limited series. It's fine. This was it was fun to read because it had been a while since I'd read any more stuff. They brought him back into Marvel continuity a couple years ago. I want to say like pre-pandemic, and he was like kind of a villain again. He'd become this kind of he reverted to his kind of Imperious Rex. I am the ruler of Atlantis, and we will war with the surface people. And there was a really good Invaders title uh, that revolved around that. And then they kind of got sick of him, I guess, because then he just kind of went away again. Which again, that just kind of happens. And I think that was kind of similar. Like, I don't think he had been in many comics, Marvel comics, around 1984 when this came out. So they're like, oh, why don't we throw him another one? So it's J.M. DeMatteis, who's a industry diehard, and writing it. Bob Budiansky drew it. You don't see a lot. He pretty much bailed after the 80s, I think. Back to the silver, or back to the Bronze Age, rather. Once more, I read What If number 6. This is what if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers. So rather than Ben Grimm becoming the Thing, he sprouts these wings, becomes Dragonfly. The Human Torch becomes this metallic fellow called Mandroid. um, Susan Richards she has the same powers as Mr. Fantastic does and becomes Ultra Woman. And Reed Richards becomes just this disembodied brain. And it's very silly. I love What If. I always will. I haven't watched the show yet. It is really something because What If was predicated on the fact that there were all these readers who knew Marvel continuity backwards and forwards. And for the Marvel Cinematic Universe to get to that point where they're like, oh, we can do alternative timelines and stuff. All right. Yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot of MCU content out there. So that's fun. But it is like a lot of these books like 20th century comics, really very wordy. And there definitely comes, I think, in each and every one of these comics, I got to a point where I was just like, okay, I'm just going to flip through it. Because it just gets very verbose and it just gets to be a lot. Here's something that I'd been meaning to get to for some time, and I'm still not quite done with. This is Dark Horse Comics. This was an anthology series that ran for a couple, 3 years. Back in the 80s, one of their first anthologies, one of their first books was called Dark Horse Presents. And you just don't see a lot of anthology books anymore. Marvel brought back Marvel Comics Presents a couple years ago for about a year, and then it quickly went. So, like this issue, for example, you have a Predator story, you have a Time Cop story, you have a Renegade story, you have a RoboCop story. So it's like all, they're more popular, than Aliens comes up. And then like one story will end and another one will start, so you're always kind of in the middle. And it's a fun read. The RoboCop stories are really good. And that's the other thing about Dark Horse that I've always liked is they did Predator, they did Alien, and they did RoboCop. And aside from the original films, I don't care for any of those franchises very much. Even the Alien movies, I'm not even really over the moon for. But goddamn, if Dark Horse does not do a good comic with those properties, RoboCop especially. RoboCop, the only part of the franchise that's worth a poop after the original film is the comics. And a lot of the Marvel comics that they did in the 80s were terrible. But when Dark Horse did it into the 90s, forget about it. They had Terminator versus RoboCop, and they had all kinds of great. And then in the early teens, I see maybe even the late aughts, there was I don't remember who was, it might have been Dynamite. That sounds right, Dynamite or Boom. One of these other indies got the RoboCop like the license and started doing books. They're all great. It just to me proves that comics are even better than movies. But also, I always have felt whatever like RoboCop is in my top 10 for sure. The 1987 Peter Verhoeven film, absolutely in my top 10. It's such an 80s science fiction, but it's very good 80s science fiction. It's very over the top, very silly in a lot of ways, but also extremely satirical. Like all this stuff that I think that people praised Blade Runner for. I think RoboCop did way better. Certainly way more entertainingly. And it almost immediately went off the rails. The second one sucked, and I couldn't even bring myself to watch the third one, even though I think I had a VHS set of all three, and I still couldn't bring myself to watch RoboCop 3. I don't even think I get all the way through number two. It was a lot of number two. There was that TV show which wasn't very good either, but I don't even really remember watching it. Avatar did a thing like at the beginning, like in the early aughts, where they did comic book adaptations of a lot of those because Frank Miller had actually written a lot of those. Frank Miller, I think, even had written RoboCop 3. But even at that point, I was like, well, Frank's not, as much as I love Frank Miller's work, he's not uh, perfect. So, there you have picks of last week. Ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. Okay, good. We're done. I don't need to show you this sign. You know where you're